So, I 26F live with two roommates, Jess 28F and Sarah 27F. We've all been living together for just over a year now. In the beginning, it was pretty great. We didn't have any major issues, and I genuinely thought I had lucked out in the roommate department. You always hear these nightmare stories about people who don't get along with their roommates, but for the first few months, everything was smooth sailing. Jess and Sarah both seemed pretty chill. We each had our own shelves in the fridge and pantry. There was kind of an unspoken agreement that if you ran out of, like, ketchup or something small, it was fine to borrow some from each other, but we all generally respected one another's space. I mean, we're adults, right? How hard could it be to not touch other people's stuff? Things were fine at first. Jess and I would occasionally share food, like, if I made a big dinner, I didn't mind offering her some. It wasn't a big deal. But after a while, I started noticing that she wasn't just borrowing small things like a splash of milk or a couple of chips. She started taking entire meals. I remember the first time it happened clearly. I had prepped a nice pasta dish that was supposed to last me the whole week. I came home from work, looking forward to heating up a portion, only to find an empty container in the fridge. Jess had eaten the whole thing. I was pissed but didn't want to cause drama. I figured maybe it was an emergency, or she was really hungry and didn't have time to get food, so I decided to bring it up casually. I wasn't accusatory or anything, just a friendly reminder that we all have our own food, and it would be great if she could ask before taking something. She immediately apologized, said she hadn't realized how much she had eaten, and promised she'd replace it. I felt awkward about it, but I thought, okay, she gets it now. It won't happen again. But, of course, it did. It started with small things. I'd buy a bag of chips and suddenly half of it was gone before I even got a chance to sit down with them. Or I'd grab a snack for work the next day, only to find out that Jess had already helped herself to it. I'd come home starving after a long day, ready to dig into something I'd planned out, and she'd have taken it. And it wasn't like she was doing this out of desperation. She had her own food. It just seemed like she couldn't be bothered to make her own meals when mine were already there, cooked, prepped, and easy to grab. I confronted her again. This time I was a little more direct. I told her that while I didn't mind sharing occasionally, it was getting frustrating that my food kept disappearing without her asking. She apologized again, saying she'd been meaning to go grocery shopping but hadn't had the time. She promised, again, to replace everything and said it wouldn't happen anymore. Spoiler alert, it happened again. This time, it was my prepped lunches for the week. I work full-time, and meal prepping is something I rely on to save time during the week. I can't afford to eat out every day, and I also don't have the time to cook fresh meals every night. So, when I came home to find that 2 of my carefully prepped meals were just gone, I lost my cool. I'm not proud of it, but I snapped at Jess. I told her that this was getting ridiculous and that I couldn't afford to keep feeding both of us. She played dumb at first, like she didn't realize how much she had taken, but eventually, she apologized yet again and promised to pay me back. You can guess what happened next. She never paid me back, and the food stealing continued. It wasn't just my meal preps, either. She started eating all of my snacks. I'm talking granola bars, chips, yogurt, even fruit. I'd buy something for myself, only to come home and find it completely gone. I started feeling like I couldn't keep anything in the house without it disappearing. It got to the point where I felt like I was doing a weekly grocery haul just to feed Jess, and I was tired of it. After one particularly frustrating day, I had a long talk with her. I explained how much this was affecting me, both financially and emotionally. It's exhausting to come home and find that your food is constantly being taken without permission, especially when you're on a budget. Jess apologized again, but I could tell it was just to get me to stop talking. She'd apologize, but nothing ever changed. Then came the breaking point. I had made this amazing stir-fry that I was really proud of. I'd prepped it all over the weekend, and it was supposed to last me for a few dinners. I was looking forward to having it after a long day at work, but when I opened the fridge, the entire container was gone. Jess had eaten the entire thing. I was furious. I stormed into her room and demanded to know why she thought it was okay to eat my entire meal without even asking. She gave me some lame excuse about being so hungry and said she'd pay me back for it. I was done. I knew then that talking to her wasn't going to work. I had given her chance after chance, and nothing changed. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next day, I ordered a lockbox for the pantry. It wasn't anything crazy, just a small lockable storage box where I could keep my dry goods and snacks. I also cleared out a section of the fridge, labeled it as mine, and started locking up anything I didn't want Jess to take. It felt a little extreme, but at that point, I didn't see any other option. I wasn't going to keep feeding her, and talking clearly wasn't working. Jess noticed the lockbox pretty quickly. She didn't say anything at first, but I could tell she was pissed. She started making passive-aggressive comments like, "Oh, I guess we're locking up food now, and can't even trust your roommates." Huh? She even made a sarcastic comment in front of some of our mutual friends about how I was putting everything under lock and key like we were in some kind of prison. It was so awkward, and I felt like she was trying to make me look like the bad guy. What really pissed me off, though, was that Sarah, our other roommate, started getting involved. She came to me one night and said she understood why I was frustrated, but that she thought I was taking things too far by locking up my food. She told me it was creating tension in the house and making things uncomfortable. I explained that I had no other choice. Jess wasn't respecting my boundaries, and I couldn't keep affording to feed her. Sarah sympathized but still said that I should have tried handling it in a less aggressive way. At that point, I was just over it. I didn't think I was being aggressive, I was just protecting my stuff. I didn't want to fight with my roommates, but I also wasn't going to be a doormat. And yet, here I am, feeling like I'm the bad guy for simply wanting to keep my food safe. At that point, I was just over it. I didn't think I was being aggressive, I was just protecting my stuff. I didn't want to fight with my roommates, but I also wasn't going to be a doormat. And yet, here I am, feeling like I'm the bad guy for simply wanting to keep my food safe. Jess had made it clear she had no boundaries when it came to my groceries, and while I didn't want to escalate things any further, I know I wasn't the one in the wrong here. A couple of days after the passive-aggressive comments started, Jess decided to sit me down for what she called a house talk. I knew this was going to be more about her trying to paint herself as the victim, but I went along with it because, honestly, I thought maybe we could finally resolve this once and for all. Maybe, just maybe, she'd see things from my perspective if we talked it out. Well, I was wrong. We sat down in the living room. Jess started off by saying how uncomfortable the house had become because of all the tension. She was all like, "I think we need to address this lockbox situation. We live together, and there should be trust between us. I don't think it's fair that you're locking up food. If we're roommates, we shouldn't be treating each other like criminals or thieves." At that point, I was already holding back an eye roll. The trust between us. That would imply there was ever trust in the first place, and honestly, if she had respected my boundaries and stopped eating my food when I first brought it up, none of this would have even happened. I stayed calm, though. I told her, "I'm not locking up my food because I don't trust you in general, Jess. I'm locking it up because you keep eating it, and we've had this conversation multiple times. This is the only way I can make sure my groceries are safe." That's when Jess's tone shifted. She got defensive, and I could tell the conversation was about to go sideways. She folded her arms, leaned back, and said, "Well, maybe if you didn't make it so easy, I wouldn't feel the need to eat your stuff. It's not like I don't cook. I just get busy, but seriously, we should trust each other. If you're going to keep locking up your food, I'm going to have to take action." Take action? At that point, I was honestly confused. What was she planning to do? Eat my food even more aggressively, steal the lockbox? I had no idea what taking action meant, but the whole thing was starting to feel ridiculous. So, I told her, "Jess, I don't hide my food from Sarah. I don't hide it from guests. I'm locking it up because you're so lazy you can't even cook for yourself. You think you're entitled to other people's stuff, and I'm done subsidizing your eating habits." She looked absolutely offended, like I had just slapped her across the face. She leaned forward and snapped, "I'm not lazy. I cook. I fried your food before I ate it. Isn't that cooking?" For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or be even more pissed. Did she really just say that reheating my meal prep and frying it counted as cooking? I couldn't help myself. I burst out laughing. Like, an actual, full-on laugh because the absurdity of the situation hit me all at once. She seriously thought frying my pre-cooked meal was the same as making something from scratch. Jess did not take my laughter well. She glared at me, and I could tell I had embarrassed her. But honestly, at that point, I didn't care. The whole situation was beyond ridiculous. After the conversation, we went our separate ways, and I figured she'd finally leave me and my food alone. Clearly, I had made my point, or so I thought. The very next day, I came home from work, tired and ready to relax. I had one of those long, draining days where you're just counting down the minutes until you can get home, take off your shoes, and enjoy something good to eat. I headed straight for the pantry where I had stashed my snacks and dry goods in the lockbox. But when I opened the pantry door, I immediately noticed something was off. The lockbox looked different. I stepped closer and saw that the side of the box had been smashed in, like someone had taken something heavy and hit it over and over. The lock was broken. My heart sank as I pulled it open. Sure enough, half of my snacks were gone: granola bars, chips, even a box of cereal. All gone. I stood there, staring at the mess in disbelief. Who else could it have been? There was no question in my mind that Jess had done it. It wasn't like someone had broken into the apartment. Sarah had been at work all day like me, so it obviously wasn't her. This had Jess written all over it. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down, but I was absolutely livid. This wasn't just about taking food anymore. This was a blatant act of disrespect. Jess had intentionally broken into my stuff because I wouldn't let her steal my food anymore. She had made it personal. I walked into the living room, where Jess was casually sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I didn't even bother with a polite approach this time. I walked right up to her and said, "Did you break into my lockbox?" She barely glanced up from her phone. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice completely nonchalant, as if this was the most normal conversation in the world. "Jess," I said, my voice shaking with frustration, "my lockbox is smashed, and half my food is gone. I know you did it. You're the only one who's been passive-aggressive about this whole situation, and now my stuff is missing." She finally looked up at me, still feigning innocence. "Maybe you should have gotten a better lock," she said with a smirk. "It's not my fault if your stuff isn't secure." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The audacity of it all. She wasn't even denying it. She was straight up admitting that she'd broken into my box and stolen my food, but she was acting like it was my fault for not having a stronger lock. I was beyond angry at this point, but I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my temper. "Jess," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you've crossed a line. You can't just take my stuff and act like it's no big deal. I don't care if you think locking up food is childish. I did it because you gave me no choice, and now you've destroyed my property. You need to replace everything you took and pay for the damage." She just shrugged, totally unbothered. "I didn't break anything," she said, still playing dumb, "but if you want to make a big deal out of it, go ahead. I'm not replacing anything." At that point, I realized there was no reasoning with her. Jess wasn't going to take responsibility for her actions, and I was done wasting my energy on her. I walked away, knowing I had two options: either let it go or escalate things further. So after the whole lockbox fiasco, I had a choice to make. Either I could continue trying to safeguard my food like it was Fort Knox, or I could switch things up entirely. I decided to change my approach, hoping it would drive the point home. Maybe if I made it even more inconvenient for Jess to steal from me, she'd finally get the hint. So I went to the kitchen and moved everything I had out of the lockbox and into the refrigerator. Dry goods, snacks, prepped meals, all of it. And I didn't just shove it in haphazardly. No, I organized it so meticulously that you could practically hear the Tetris theme playing in the background. I arranged my stuff in such a way that if even one thing went missing, it would be immediately obvious. I labeled everything, from containers to condiment bottles, like it was some kind of meal prep crime scene. When Jess came home that evening, I made a point of letting her know, calmly but clearly. I told her, from now on, all my food is going in the fridge, out in the open. If you take anything without asking, I'm going to have to start measuring it, and I'm keeping track of everything. At first, she looked at me like I'd completely lost it. Then she started laughing. Not just a small chuckle, no. She was full on with laughter, as if what I said was the most absurd thing she'd ever heard. "You're seriously going to measure your food?" she asked, still laughing. "Do you think that's going to stop me? You're just making it easier for me. Now I don't have to break into your stupid box." I just stood there, biting my tongue, because I knew she was trying to bait me into an argument. Jess loved to push buttons, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me snap. Instead, I just repeated, "I'm measuring everything." Then I turned and went back to my room. I was pissed, though. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, but I needed to let it cool down. I didn't want to lose my temper and do something rash. But in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next day, I came home from work, tired, hungry, and just wanting to relax. But as soon as I walked through the door, I knew something was off. I could hear someone in the kitchen, and the unmistakable smell of my food hit my nose. I dropped my bag and rushed in to see Jess, sitting at the kitchen table with a plate full of my leftovers. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She looked up at me with a smirk, shoving a forkful of my food into her mouth like she was daring me to say something. "Oh hey," she said, her mouth full, "this is really good. You should have told me you were such a good cook." I was done, absolutely done. My patience was officially at its limit. Without even thinking, I stormed over to her. Jess was too busy enjoying my meal to notice what was about to happen. I grabbed the bowl of food she was eating from, and before she could react, I smeared it all over her face. "What the hell?" Jess yelled, jumping back as I kept pushing the food into her face, the leftover sauce and rice sticking to her skin. She tried to grab the bowl, but I yanked it back before tossing the rest of the contents on her lap. "Are you serious?" she shrieked, wiping food off her face with her sleeve. "Are you out of your mind?" I didn't stop. I went straight for the ketchup bottle. I twisted off the cap, and with Jess still sitting there in shock, I squirted ketchup all over her hair. It dripped down in thick, red globs coating her head like a bad scene from a horror movie. "Do you know how long it takes to fry food?" Jess screamed, flailing her arms to get the ketchup off her face. "I fried this, that's cooking, it takes time." I was beyond reasoning at this point. I squeezed the bottle harder, laughing as ketchup splattered across her shirt and onto the table. "Cooking? You mean my food that you stole again?" I said between bursts of laughter. "Oh, yeah, Jess, it must have been so hard to heat up something that I already made." Jess was scrambling now, trying to push past me, but I wasn't done. I grabbed another handful of the food that was still left in the bowl and smeared it right into her face again. It was messy, it was chaotic, and it was oddly satisfying. "You owe me $1,000, I said, still laughing. "You've eaten how many of my groceries?" "Yeah, I'm adding it up. Every meal you stole, every snack you never replaced. It's adding up, Jess, and I want my money back." $1,000? Are you crazy?" Jess shouted, standing up, her hair a sticky mess of ketchup and food. "I'm not paying you anything, you're insane." "Oh, you're going to pay me," I said, dead serious now. "One way or another, you're going to make this right. If you don't, I'm going to keep track of everything, and I'll take this up with the landlord. Or maybe even small claims court. Either way, you're paying." Jess stood there, still wiping food from her face and hair, glaring at me like she wanted to throw something at me. But she didn't. She knew she was in the wrong, and no matter how much she tried to twist things, she couldn't get out of this one, not this time. "You're crazy," she muttered, backing away. "I'm not paying for your groceries." I crossed my arms and stood my ground. "We'll see about that." And with that, Jess stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood in the kitchen, still feeling the rush of adrenaline, surrounded by the mess I had just made. Part of me was shocked at how far things had escalated, but another part of me felt satisfied. In the days that followed, I noticed an immediate shift. My food, it wasn't disappearing anymore. No snacks mysteriously vanished. No more missing prep meals or last-minute runs to the store because something I was planning to eat had somehow ended up in Jess's stomach. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but for once, it felt like I could open the fridge without worrying that half my groceries were going to be gone. I could see Jess sulking around the apartment, giving me side-eye whenever she passed by. She didn't say much, but the tension in the air was thick. She was definitely pissed, and I didn't blame her for being angry about the way I'd humiliated her with the ketchup and the food smearing fiasco. But what could she say at this point? She was the one who kept taking my food, lying about replacing it, and acting like I was the crazy one for being upset. If anything, this was long overdue. One afternoon, about a week later, I decided it was time to bring up the one thing Jess hadn't addressed yet, the money. I had made it clear that she owed me for all the groceries she had taken without permission, and I wasn't about to let her off the hook. I had given her time to cool off, but enough was enough. I knocked on Jess's door, and when she didn't answer, I pushed it open a little and called out, "Hey, Jess. We need to talk about something." There was a beat of silence before I heard her sigh, and she begrudgingly muttered, "What now?" I walked into the living room where she was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone, clearly trying to act like everything was fine between us, but I wasn't here for small talk. "So," I started, crossing my arms, "it's been a week. You've stopped taking my food, which is great, but we still have some unfinished business." Jess barely looked up from her phone, her face a mixture of annoyance and indifference. I could already tell this conversation wasn't going to be easy. "Unfinished business," she repeated, finally glancing up at me. "What are you talking about?" "The groceries, Jess," I said, trying to keep my tone calm but firm. "You owe me for everything you took without asking. I'm not letting this go. I've calculated it all, and you owe me $1,000. At this, Jess's expression changed. She sat up a little straighter, giving me an incredulous look. $1,000. She scoffed, putting her phone down. "Are you serious? What groceries are worth $1,000? You're exaggerating." I could feel my patience starting to wear thin again, but I took a deep breath. "You've been taking my food for months, Jess. It adds up. And you never replaced anything. We both know it." She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms defensively. "Okay, but 1,000, that's ridiculous." I stared at her for a moment, feeling the frustration bubble back up. Clearly, she still wasn't taking me seriously. I glanced at the kitchen counter where the ketchup bottle was still sitting, remnants of our last confrontation. And then, almost without thinking, I reached for the bottle. Jess's eyes widened as soon as she saw me pick it up. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice suddenly more alert, more nervous. I held up the bottle, pointing it in her direction, not squeezing it yet but just making sure she understood I wasn't playing around. "You know what groceries, Jess. Don't pretend like you don't. I've given you enough time. If you don't want to pay up, we can settle this another way. I'm sure the landlord would love to hear about this." Her face twisted in a mixture of panic and anger. That's it," she blurted, standing up from the couch and throwing her hands in the air. "Fine, don't worry, I'll pay you. Just put the ketchup down, all right?" I couldn't help but smirk a little, lowering the bottle, but still holding onto it for good measure. Jess was clearly rattled. She wiped her hands down her jeans, as if trying to calm herself, before muttering, "I'll figure it out. I'll pay you back, just chill." "Good," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "Because if I have to keep having this conversation, things are going to get a lot more uncomfortable around here." Jess gave me a tight-lipped nod, still looking a little shaken but clearly not willing to test me any further. I turned and walked back to my room, satisfied that, for once, Jess seemed to actually take me seriously. Maybe I did overreact, but at the same time, I don't think it's too much to ask for my roommates to respect what's mine. Am I a 4 because smeared food and ketchup on her face?